Hello, everyone. Welcome to Daily Dose TV 247. In today's episode, we'll be taking a closer look at workplace ethics issue. So at my workplace, we hold quarterly ethics discussions that explore situations and decisions connected to corporate culture, compliance, inclusion, conflicts of interest, data protection, social responsibility, and it also covers how to speak up and report concerns. Today, I'm bringing that same kind of conversation here with all of you, and we're going to talk about why people commit fraud. And to frame our discussion, we'll be using the fraud triangle, a framework or model that explains how pressure, opportunity, and rationalization come together and create conditions where fraud becomes possible. So, to kick off our discussion, let's first define fraud. So, fraud is an intentional act of deception carried out to obtain something of value or unfair legal right or financial scams. To understand why people commit fraud, we're going to look at three driving forces: pressure, opportunity, and rationalization or psychological justification. Together, these three elements make up the fraud triangle. The fraud triangle is a widely recognized framework and one of the commonly used tools for analyzing fraud cases. It is created by criminologist Donald R. Cressy. The fraud triangle helps organizations identify the conditions that allow fraud to occur and highlights where prevention efforts should be focused. So fraud typically occurs when these three factors are present. So let's look at the fraud triangle illustration we have here. So at the bottom, we see pressure or motivation, which could be financial or personal pressure that pushes or motivates someone towards fraud. There's pressure to meet company targets, personal pressure due to financial problems brought about by gambling, medical bills, or even to maintain a luxurious lifestyle, which they cannot even afford. So on the left side, we see opportunity. So it is to exploit weak internal security controls like no oversight or supervision, absence of separation of duties, and lack of audits, which make the company highly vulnerable to fraud. And then on the right side, there's rationalization, which justifies the fraud being committed by thinking, I'm just borrowing the money, or the company will not notice, or everyone is doing it, or I work hard and they don't pay me enough. So on the right side of the slide are the discussion questions. So let's take a deeper dive into the fraud triangle. So for question number 1, who is more likely to commit fraud? Someone under extreme pressure, or someone with opportunity, or someone who can justify unethical behavior? So the most accurate answer comes from understanding how these three factors like pressure, opportunity, and rationalization work together within the fraud triangle. So actually, all three matter. Like extreme pressure can make someone feel desperate enough to commit fraud. Then rationalization is what lets someone or convince someone that it's not that bad. And then someone with opportunity is usually more than likely to commit the fraud because pressure and rationalization push someone towards the edge, but fraud can't happen without an opening. So if the door is locked, pressure and rationalization don't get very far. So now that we've explored which factor makes someone most likely to commit fraud, we can shift to the organizational side of the conversation. So the next question is, it's asking us to think about prevention. So which part or which side of the fraud triangle is easiest to control? Pressure is difficult due to employers can't fully control or monitor an employee's personal financial stress, family issues, or pressures to maintain a certain lifestyle. Though companies can reduce workplace pressure like unrealistic KPIs or key performance indicators, goals and targets, or toxic culture, still, pressure can't be eliminated entirely because so much of it comes from outside of the organization. And then rationalization is even harder because this lives inside a person's mind. Organizations can influence it through ethics training, leadership modeling integrity, but they can't really control how someone thinks or justify their own behavior. While pressure and rationalization are both difficult to control because, as mentioned, they depend on personal circumstances, individual mindset, and moral reasoning, this brings us to look at opportunity. So opportunity is the easiest to control because this is where organizations have the most direct power through well-designed structure, policies and internal controls, separation or segregation of duties, and having independent audits. So with that in mind, we can move to the next part of the conversation, one that shifts from organizational controls to individual responsibility. So which matters more in preventing fraud, personal values or strong ethical training? So personal values carry more weight because, these are the internal compass that guide behavior even when no one is watching, no policy is being enforced, and no training is going on. Meanwhile, ethical training also plays a crucial role because it makes those values visible. It reinforces personal values, makes expectations clear, and help people feel supported in choosing the ethical path. It encourages and teaches employees how to report concerns and where to go when something doesn't feel right. In short, personal values drive the behavior, but ethical training strengthens and supports those values, creating a culture where doing the right thing becomes the norm. So now that we've looked at the influence of personal values and ethical trainings, we can move on to another key part of the fraud triangle, which is the rationalization. So how much influence an organization's culture has on the way employees justify their behavior. So an organization's ethical culture has powerful impact on employees' rationalization. Why? Because when a company sets clear expectations through code of ethics or code of conduct, conflict of interest policies, and having regular ethics training, it establishes clear standards for decision making, helps employees recognize warning signs before problems escalate. A strong and healthy ethical culture also encourages reporting by providing a safe space for employees to speak up and knowing that concerns can be raised without facing retaliation. So, these things increase trust, improve transparency, therefore decrease the risks of fraud. Having a strong ethical culture makes rationalization difficult to justify because it creates social pressure to do the right thing and takes away the excuse to make fraud seem acceptable. So, before we move on to our final question here, it's worth noting that the fraud triangle has been expanded into what some of you might have heard of, the fraud diamond. This model, so the fraud diamond, adds a fourth element, capability. That's the fourth element. The skills and confidence needed to commit and conceal the fraud. Pressure, opportunity, rationalization may exist, but without capability, fraud often cannot occur. It's a topic we could explore more deeply in another time or in the future, but it leads naturally into our last question. If you could expand the traditional fraud triangle into a fraud diamond by adding a fourth element, what would you choose and why? So, when we imagine adding our own fourth element, several meaningful possibilities out there emerge, each highlighting a different dimension of fraud risk. Say, integrity. Two people may face the same pressure and opportunity, but someone with stronger integrity may refuse to commit fraud. Integrity acts as a personal barrier that stops misconduct before it even starts. So we can also have the fear of consequences as our fourth element. While pressure, opportunity, and rationalization push someone to the act of fraud, fear of consequences can pull them back. People weigh on risk, like, is it worth losing my job? Is it worth ruining my reputation? Or is it worth facing legal troubles? These consequences also be internal, like guilt, shame, or fear of disappointing others, especially loved ones. So I hope you care to share the fourth element you can think of or any messages you may have. Feel free to drop those in the comment section. And that concludes today's discussion. Fraud prevention isn't just about controls or policies. It's about people, culture, values, and the systems that support them. When organizations strengthen ethical expectations, support employees, and create safe spaces for speaking up, they make fraud not only harder to commit, but harder to justify. Thanks for joining me in this conversation. I hope you enjoy and able to walk away with something valuable. I'll see you next time here in my channel, Daily Dose TV 247, where there's always something to talk about.